By international relations expert Dr. Emmanuel Navon. Dr. Navon, great to have you with us. Now, today's meeting is between Bolton and his Russian counterpart. We know at least a tripartite meeting and all of these side meetings that are happening between each country were meant to initially focus on the issue of Syria. How much of a backseat is this likely to take to the US-Iran tensions?
So I think clearly this meeting shows that the United States wants to coordinate also with Russia on the very sensitive questions of Iran and of Syria. We know that there was almost a U.S. military intervention against Iran, which was cancelled at the last minute, and tensions are really raising in the region. And the Russians have a role to play. I mean, the Russians were active in reaching also the JCPOA, the nuclear deal with Iran. They are the one who kept Assad afloat in Syria, so they have a role to play. At the end of the day, of course, the U.S. and Russia have clashing interests in the Middle East. Obviously, the Russians want Iran to be reintegrated in the energy market for their own interests when the United States wants to reimpose sanctions. So it's very doubtful whether or not the Russians and the Americans will be able to reach some kind of compromise, because at the end of the day, they have very diverging interests in the region.
So then what do U.S. and Israel, who are more aligned at least, have to leverage into Russia?
So I think Russia here has mostly an economic interest, because Russia, one of the reasons why Russia wants Iran to be brought back in the energy market and not to reimpose tougher sanctions on Iran is because Russia, together with Iran and Qatar, holds about 2/3 of the world's natural gas resources, and it wants to, for years, it's been trying to establish some kind of cartel of natural gas similar to OPEC, and Russia needs that because it wants to keep the prices of natural gas at a high level. Those prices have been going down because the U.S. itself has become a huge producer of natural gas. So Russia has a very clear interest today, economic interest, in not having tougher sanctions on Iran. So therefore the U.S. does have some kind of leverage on Russia on that issue.
And we know that President Donald Trump is set to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin at the G20 summit in Osaka later this week. What can be advanced, at least before that meeting in this tripartite summit tomorrow?
Probably some kind of trade-off on the question of Crimea and the question of Iran. In other words, if the United States almost officially ceased to demand some kind of compromise or the end of Russia's regime in Crimea versus a more flexible Russian policy on Syria and Iran, that might be. I mean, it does look like today the Trump administration is willing to look the other way on the question of Crimea, but on the condition, of course, that the Russians cooperate more against Iran aggression in the Middle East. So there might be some kind of trade-off between Trump and Putin on that, something that would not have happened, of course, under the previous U.S. administration.
And we know that Bolton's visit to Israel, of course, is coming just ahead of this, a 2-day conference or workshop, we could call it, economic workshop in Bahrain, the U.S. peacemaking efforts in the Middle East. We know that Bolton was also given a tour of Israel's north, and Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister, showing Bolton what Israel's security concerns are in that part of the region. Let's take a listen to what was set up there.
John, as you can see, the Jordan Valley offers Israel the minimal strategic depth and strategic height for the defense of our country. But our presence here also guarantees stability and security for the entire region. For those who say that for peace to be established, Israel has to leave the Jordan Valley, and I'll say that's not going to bring peace. That's going to bring war and terror, and we've been there. We don't want to be there again.
I just think it's too bad, Prime Minister, that more Americans can't come to locations like this, see the geography, understand its significance, understand how it affects Israel's critical security position, and explain why Israel's taken the view that it has.
So, Dr. Navon, Netanyahu saying Israel's presence in the Jordan Valley must continue for the security of Israel and for the security of all. Why is this a non-negotiable for Israel?
So mostly because of topography, because you have this mountainous territory. Basically, the West Bank is on a high hill, and it controls all the rest. I mean, from the top of it, you can see all the rest of Israel, Israel Central, Tel Aviv, where we're right now. And on the other side, you have the Jordan Valley. And in the past, of course, we had in previous wars between Israel and the Arab world, tanks that were sent from Iraq and Jordan towards Israel. And therefore, it was always considered by Israel its security belt vis-a-vis possible attacks from outside. It's something that was debated, that was discussed under the previous negotiations under John Kerry in 2013 and 14, when Israel insisted on keeping sovereignty over the Jordan Valley, and there was some kind of compromise where eventually that sovereignty would end after a few years. So I think what Israel is trying to obtain today, ahead of the announcement of the U.S. peace plan, is an agreement that in any future peace agreement, Israel would maintain not only its presence but also its sovereignty over the Jordan Valley, which for most Israeli governments, all Israeli governments in the past, was considered non-negotiable, including the Labour government of Yitzhak Rabin in the early 90s. I think very clearly, ahead of the announcement of the Trump peace plan, Israel here is sending the message that this part of the West Bank is non-negotiable, that it is too important to Israel's security.
All right, well, the Bahrain Economic Workshop will be happening this week, and I24 News will be on the ground. They will be bringing everybody the latest developments on that. Dr.